After a grueling 11-day trip with 7 games, the Pacers road trip is over. They lose 121-115 to the Timberwolves. They were tied with 35 seconds to go, but a rough ending for the Pacers. We'll break down the game and a bunch of stuff that mattered in this game. A bunch of guys returned from injuries, some new lineup wrinkles, all that coming today. Plus, wrap up the road trip with some numbers and digits, all coming on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today, boy, do we have a lot to get to. Pacers road trip is finally over, mercifully. It was so long. They played so many tough teams, and they escaped 2-5. One game over 500 because they lost the final game of the trip in Minnesota, 121-115, even without Cat. That Minnesota team is just a kryptonite for the Pacers. We'll talk about that game, what went wrong and right for the Pacers. They had so many guys return from injuries, some new lineup wrinkles, so 2 segments on the game, all this stuff to talk about. In the ending, Pacers were tied with about 35 seconds left and blew it down the stretch of the game, although I don't think they blew it as much as it's been made out to be or what I just said. At the end, we'll talk about the road trip that was 2-5. Lots of digits that are concerning to me for the Pacers from that trip. We'll open, though, with the game that just happened. 121-115. Minnesota beats the Pacers. That does not tell the story at all, just talking about the score, because first half, all Wolves, right? They're up 23 points in the second quarter. Third quarter is all Pacers. It was all over the place in a way that the final score does not tell any story of this game. And I think to start telling the story of this game, you have to go back to something I said before the road trip even started, that this game felt like a scheduled loss to me, right? Third game in 4 nights, 7th game in 11 nights, the last game of a long road trip where it's so easy to be mentally checked out. The reference I always have is the Warriors team that won 73 games and started 28-29-0. Their first loss was the final game of a long road trip in Milwaukee against a not yet good Bucks team, because it's very hard to win that much on the road. And so that felt like a hurdle for the Pacers to me. And so credit the Pacers for actually overcoming that a little and keeping it close, but it looked like that was going to be an issue, energy level, early, right? They got smoked out of the gates in this game. They were down 47-24 at one point. They looked lost. They looked toast, because even with guys returning, they couldn't stop the Wolves at all, and their offense could not keep up. Derek Kramer and I talked yesterday about a big problem for this Pacers team on this road trip is their offense has been awful, like completely miserable, last in the league for a stretch, right? And that's not what you think of with the Pacers, right? They're down 12-3 early, 2 assists in the first quarter for the Indiana Pacers. 2 assists. They made 4 shots. They got enough free throws to not be like totally embarrassed, but they made 4 shots. They had 2 assists in the first quarter on a game when Haliburton finished with 15. Like, that is just a jarring stat to see, and some of it's just that they missed some okay looks, but they looked awful at the beginning, right? They subbed in Mathurin earlier to try to jumpstart the offense. That didn't work. They went to the second unit a little earlier. The second unit was awful. Nothing was working for the Pacers early, and that's when it was 47-24, right? They looked awful. And then, by the way, I noted this when they were down 47-24. That means in 6 of their 7 road games, they were down 17-plus at one point. Very bad road trip. The Pacers escaped with 2 wins. And it was against, this is also crazy to say, this is 2 bad tangents in a row. I shouldn't be doing this, but the 2 teams they beat, the Lakers and Warriors, have a ton of name recognition. They also have the 2 worst records of the 7 teams they played on this trip, because the Warriors lost tonight and Minnesota won. So Minnesota now ahead of the Golden State Warriors. So the 2 worst teams, air quotes, that they played on this trip were the Lakers and Warriors, the only 2 wins they get. Anyway, they're down 47-24, and then things click. The starters, the 3 start to fall. Things start to go in. Pacers' second quarter was brilliant, especially the last 6 minutes of that frame. Ton of credit to the way the Pacers played in that quarter. They scored 44 points in the second quarter. 10 from Haliburton, who hit some threes and had 6 assists in just that quarter. Myles Turner was awesome in that quarter. 3 rebounds, 8 points. And Buddy Hield was the star of the show. He hit 4 threes, right? He could not miss from deep. And the Pacers got to the line 11 times. Their offense really figured it out, especially in that second half of that quarter, right? Basically from that 23-point lead on. They were only down a couple at halftime, right? They were right in it. They looked like a team that was going to be able to make a comeback and be right in this game. So impressive work to close that quarter and carry that momentum through the third quarter, right? They kept it going. They were looking good. The starters were still playing pretty well. And if you cut the box score to just the third quarter, things look good for that group, right? My Buddy had 8 points in the third. Myles had 6, right? Andrew Nembhard had 5. They were doing okay until the bench came in. The bench was really awful in this game. And this was a mostly healthy Pacers. They were missing one player, Jalen Smith. We'll talk about that in the next segment. That came out of nowhere. The bench came in. TJ McConnell in the third quarter, 0 for 1, -4. Isaiah Jackson played almost 5 minutes. He had zeros in all stats except one foul, -6. Benedict Mathurin was 1 for 3. He was -4. As soon as they started mixing and matching, it fell apart in that quarter, and they never got their mojo back. So the bench was really crappy then. And then in the fourth quarter, same sort of story, right? TJ McConnell was -6. Mathurin was 0 for 4. He was a -8. They just couldn't pick it up. So they lost a lot of their mojo when that group came in and never got it back. So really rough bench game. I think that was kind of the reason the Pacers lost. Like, they got enough from their best players to win this game, right? Hield 26 points. He hit 7 threes. Turner had 23 and 7. He hit 4 threes. Haliburton had 26 and 15 and 3 steals. Turner also had 4 blocks. Like, those guys were fantastic. Mathurin, off night, but he still had 14. Like, that's enough from him. They got nothing from anybody else, right? Nesmith had some okay moments in this game. Nembhard was off after his huge game on Monday. McConnell was 1 for 4. Jackson was 1 for 2. Brissett, Kendall Brown, Goga all did not score, did not hit a shot. So really rough night for the non-stars, and that bled into the bench having a really rough game, and they needed that. So they try to keep up in the fourth quarter, right? The bench starts off poorly again. But the Nembhard plus, they go to a Nembhard plus bench group. That didn't work. They didn't get enough ball handling there. All huge minuses. So they couldn't score or create, right? They only had 22 assists in this whole game. I believe that is their lowest of the season. Or it might be tied, for their lowest of the season with their opening night loss, actually. So that would be their worst passing game of the year, right? A lot of their makes and their success, to credit the Pacers, they made good shots. They made off the dribble threes. 22 is their second lowest, assist total of the season. They had 21 on opening night. But they were making a lot of pull-up threes, which are typically harder, and the Wolves will live with that. And eventually that died away, and the lack of passing really caught up to them. So the starters actually pulled it back close in the fourth a little bit. They tied it up 2 different times, once like a little earlier in the frame and then once right at the end. Right? The Pacers were right in this game, despite all of their hurdles that they had to overcome. So then the end sequence happens, right? Myles Turner hits a 3, cuts it to 1. The Wolves score. The Pacers come right back down. Myles Turner hits another 3. He was huge, right? It's 109-111 when Turner goes on this spree. 109-113 when Turner goes on the spree of consecutive threes. Now it's 115-115 with 50 seconds to go. So the ending sequence is crucial in this game. Myles is playing well. Buddy Hield's playing well. Tyrese Haliburton's playing well. All those guys are having good quarters, which is also relevant to this discussion because it's clear one of them is going to get the shot, right? Turner had a 9-point quarter, and Haliburton had a 5-point quarter. So most of Hield's damage was a little earlier. But the relevant part is, and this is going to be relevant to the final 50 seconds, with about 2 minutes to go, in fact, exactly 2 minutes to go, it was 107-111, and Buddy Hield got to the left wing, and he had Rudy Gobert switched onto him, and he took 2 hard dribbles with his left hand and got to the rim and scored. He hit a layup. And that got the Pacers to down 2. And that's relevant because you get to the final minute, Myles Turner ties the game. And at the 35-second mark, it's still tied. And then a foul. Rudy Gobert gets fouled. He's headed to the free throw line in a tie game. And he hits both free throws. Credit to Rudy Gobert. So the Pacers need a bucket to tie this one up and force the Timberwolves to score one more time to win, right? So their last hope is this possession in this game after they were down 23 points in the first half. And after about 14 seconds of the shot not being there, Buddy Hield gets it on the left wing again with Rudy Gobert switched onto him. And I understand that Turner and Haliburton were the hot guys that quarter. If he had passed it to them, I think that would have been a fine choice. But given that he just 1.5 minutes ago beat this exact player off the dribble for a layup, and Rudy Gobert's not that fast, I totally am okay with Buddy Hield trying to take him off the dribble and score again. He got about 95% of the advantage he needed. He drove past Gobert. He was so close to getting this layup onto the backboard for a goaltend. It was a bang-bang play, but Gobert barely got the block in time. And so there was some criticism for Buddy for not passing. I think because he's not the fastest guy either, but because he had just scored that almost the exact same bucket, there was only like 8 on the shot clock when he was turning back to the middle. They would have had to go to a Haliburton Turner thing right away. Sure, the results say he should have passed, but I'm totally fine with him taking that shot in the moment, especially he had 26. Like, he was playing well. He had just cooked the exact same defender. It was late-ish in the clock. That's fine. He didn't score. And then the Timberwolves put it away with free throws on the other end and a dunk at the buzzer, which didn't matter. So 121-115 with the difference coming in the final 35 seconds, which makes it all the more painful for the Pacers, who truly played good enough to win for a lot of this game. You could say a lot of things, right? Season low in assists, or nearly a season low in assists, doing the Pacers, but two things stand out. And the first one stood out against Minnesota the first time, the rebounding battle. The Pacers cannot rebound against this Minnesota team. They were missing their best rebounder in Jalen Smith, but the Pacers 31 rebounds. The Timberwolves 51. The offensive glass was 16-4. The defensive glass was close enough. The offensive glass was 16-4. That's combined with the fact that the Pacers had the wrong type of turnovers, right? They won the turnover battle. Minnesota had 21 and the Pacers had 17, but Minnesota had 15 steals, whereas the Pacers had 10. You do some math there. That means the Pacers had 15 live ball turnovers, where the Timberwolves only had 12. So in the important turnovers that actually allowed transition to happen, the Timberwolves did a better job in that way, and that's why the Pacers lose this game. They lose the possession battle, right? They shot the ball well from deep. They shot the ball fine inside the arc. They made enough free throws, but they got smoked in the possession battle. And that's why the Timberwolves this time, last time they played this team, everybody was screaming out rebounding, but the teams finished nearly identical in shot attempts. This time, the Timberwolves crushed the Pacers on the glass, right? 12 more offensive rebounds, and they shot the ball 12 more times, right? That it really mattered in this game in a way that it didn't in the past, and that totally killed the Pacers. And when your role players aren't playing good enough to overcome that difference, you cannot lose the possession battle by that much. So the Pacers, without their best rebounder, couldn't get it done against Minnesota. They go 2-5 on this trip. Lots of notes from this game. Lots of notes. Tyrese Haliburton was fantastic. Myles Turner was back. Jalen Smith didn't play. Andrew Nembhard ran the second unit. My gosh, there's so much to talk about. So we'll bring it all up in the next segment to hear more about what the Pacers just did and did not do successfully on Wednesday night. But really quickly, before we talk about that, I want to talk to you guys about LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs help find the right people for your team faster and for free. It's so easy, just a few clicks, bam, your job's posted. Then you can add the purple hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile, spread the word that your company's hiring, and they have simple tools on LinkedIn Jobs like screening questions to make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so that you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. That's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, why not walk on over to Locked On Timberwolves to hear, I just said walked on Timberwolves, Locked On Timberwolves with Ben Bekeen to hear what happened on the other side as the Timberwolves get back to 500. They had a bunch of time off before this game to prep. They did it. They looked pretty good. They played pretty well, and they needed that win back at 500, back in the play-in positioning for Minnesota. So the Pacers had a lot of noteworthy stuff in this game. Sometimes I skip these just random noteworthy things segments, but there were 5 things I thought were worth talking about in this game, and I want to bring all of them up. And the first one is injuries. Good news all around for the Pacers in this game, right? We didn't know a lot about the severity of injuries for Johnson and McConnell and Haliburton and Turner. Four key guys, some of them on the court, some of them off, but either way, 4 key guys, especially so with Haliburton. What the severity was. Turner had just missed 1 game. All of them returned. All 4 of those guys were active. We'll get to the guy who was inactive later in this segment, but not only were both Haliburton and Turner back, they were awesome in this game, right? Stathead, or Basketball Reference, effectively, just tweeted this out, but this game from Tyrese Haliburton was the first game by a Pacer with at least 25 points and 15 assists in the same game. He's currently first in the NBA with 254 assists. Turner was 8 for 11 with 23.7 rebounds and 4 blocks. They plus 12 for Haliburton, plus 13 for Turner. They were fantastic. So 1, the fact that they played obviously is good. 2, no long-term severity with these injuries, which is key for both players for a million reasons. And 3, they looked good. It's not like it was bogging them down. Whereas, pre-groin injury, Haliburton was. We talked to Jeremiah Johnson about having pain. was dealing with some issues and not playing as well. I don't know that the injury was related to his poor play, but the fact that he came back and was better is certainly encouraging. Johnson was active. McConnell played as well. He was rough, right? He was rough, and some of his reps was not him at the point guard this time. They got transferred to none other than Andrew Nembhard. My last point on the injuries, though, this team is 13-12. They're barely over 500. Like, they can't deal with a lot of injuries. They will completely stumble and lose a lot of their mojo. They looked awful in Portland. Obviously, the Andrew Nembhard game makes that look not totally accurate, but I think we all know that this team needs their best players available to keep their mojo, to keep winning games right when they come home. It's a key time for them, and so to get those guys back is huge. But yes, Nembhard gets some run at the point. Something Derek Kramer and I discussed yesterday after his huge games on this road trip is he's got to get some chances to run the show somehow. He should start at the 3 still. I think that makes the most sense, but there has to be some reps where he is the point guard, right? He's earned that after his game against the Warriors. He's earned that with his solid play, and he, quite frankly, was not that good in this game. 3 for 10 from the field, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 turnovers, but was fine. His defense was still good, but they did give him a couple minutes running the show by himself at point guard. In total, about 2.5 minutes, -4 in those minutes. Now, if you want to take a ton away from the plus minuses, he was playing with Goga Batadze and Kendall Brown on the floor at the same time. That was a very wonky lineup, like up and down. But he did, the fact that it was something they explored and did, I think is noteworthy, especially because he's earned it. So will the Pacers continue to go to that? I think that's something to watch for. And if they do, will it be more of their normal second unit, or will it continue to be kind of a mix and match of players, considering who was and wasn't available? But that lineup, Kendall Brown played 5 minutes in the second quarter, didn't play in the second half, and just 2 minutes and 13 seconds for Goga in this game with Jalen Smith injured. Number 3, another noteworthy thing for the Pacers, who finally had their best start of the season against the Warriors, right? Like I said on yesterday's show, the Pacers have won the first quarter 4 times out of 25 games this season. 2 of them were by 2, 1 was by 8. And then that dominant first quarter against Golden State, they get a lot of their usual starters back and do awful to start this game, right? 47-24 is an inexcusably bad start, and that's obviously in the second quarter as well, but they were down 12-3 before they subbed. Like, they couldn't get it going. And so the start was weird, and yet blowing my mind going through the numbers after the game. The starting lineup was a +1. They were +1 together in this game. Turner, Hield, Nembhard, Haliburton, Nesmith, 38 points in their 16 minutes together. They allowed 37, right? That is what is so weird about this all the time, even in a game like this where they look miserable to start the game. That group looks totally whack. They couldn't do anything on either end of the floor. They're awesome to close the second quarter. They're awesome to start the third quarter. Clearly, that group works. Like, the players have skills that are mostly complementary enough of each other to be successful. There's just some roadblock about the start of games for this team, no matter who's on the wing, no matter who's at point guard, that they can't get over it. It's so weird because the same lineups are good throughout the rest of the game. I still don't know what to make of it or how to talk about it. Like, clearly it works. It's just not at the start of games. The guys do well in these roles. I don't get it, and I don't think the Pacers do either, quite frankly, given the way they talk about it and the way it goes. But it's their biggest kryptonite by a mile. I mean, they play well basically every other instance through a game. Besides the starts, they've got to overcome those if they want to be the team that they want to be. I know that's simple to say, but it is. Number 4 noteworthy thing from this game, Jalen Smith injured out of nowhere. Sore knee, I believe, is what the Pacers listed it as. I will double check while I'm talking. I typed that in my notes and didn't double check it, which I apologize for that. His first missed game of the season for Jalen Smith came out of nowhere. I check the injury reports every morning before games. Honestly, I check the injury reports too often, but he was not on it, right, for most of the time leading up to this game. He ends up not playing, and yes, that is correct. Sore right knee for Jalen Smith in this game. So it's his first missed one of the season, and quite a painful one to not have him for a game that the rebounding battle influenced the game as much as it did. They could have used his skill on the glass, especially because Cat didn't play, right? He would have been going against someone more plausible for him to do well against. So that the late injury report ad, which sometimes can be bad, but also in this case makes me think it's not as serious because it's probably something that they thought he was going to play during the day. And then before the game with the soreness, he said, I probably can't. And they held him out. So we'll see where that ends up. I am just guessing with the statement I just said, to be totally clear. But we'll see what happens there. Number 5, some experimenting from Rick Carlisle. Unsurprising, but Goga plays. Some of that is because Jalen Smith was out, but also Isaiah Jackson was not totally worth pulling. Yet he only finished with 2 fouls in this game, but still he turned to Goga Batadze, Rick Carlisle did. And Kendall Brown played in the rotation. This wasn't garbage time at all. They turned to those guys for serious, important minutes in this game. Rick Carlisle and the staff did. I think that's interesting. A little turn of heart from the Pacers as they try to sort out exactly what their rotation is or who they want to play. Like O'Shea Brissett played less than 7 minutes. Perhaps some experimenting going on from Rick Carlisle here as Kendall Brown gets serious rotation minutes, this time with the Pacers healthy. And Goga got a little bit of time as well. We'll see if that sticks at all, but is totally noteworthy for the Pacers, who are continuing to tinker a little bit as they look for better starts, better lineups, and soon to be back. Chris Duarte means Kendall Brown will probably go back to the G League if they're still this healthy. I guess I say soon to be back. I don't know that. I'm just assuming. But we'll see where that ends up shaking out for everybody. At the time, though, it was fun to see them play a little bit more, get a little more evaluation for those guys. Kendall Brown's defense is pretty good. His athleticism and speed lets him thrive on that end of the floor. Let's close by putting a lid on this road trip because, boy, do I have a stat that's going to blow your mind. And it's not one that I expected about the Pacers, one this season or two, to even think of as an issue for the Pacers on this road trip. Let's get to it to close today's show. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, go hop over and check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard, behind the scenes with your local experts and insights. Only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. All right, the road trip's over. The Pacers went 2-5. Like I said earlier, I probably should have saved this note for this time. The two teams they beat happen to be the worst two teams that they played, the Lakers and Warriors. That's hilarious. That is hilarious to say that those two teams are the worst two teams talent-wise and record-wise that they played, but that is literally what the standings say at the time of me talking. Either way, Andrew Nembhard saved them from an 0-7 trip where they looked awful, right? If you just want a narrative basis of this road trip, they played poorly, they gave up huge leads to other teams, and they occasionally scrapped well enough to be in games. But this is the most vulnerable this team has looked, right? Even when they were losing early in the year, they were at least in those games, right? They made a valiant comeback in Chicago. They were in it with Philly for most of the first half in those early losses, right? In their opening losses to the Wizards and Spurs. Yes, they got crushed early, but same kind of deal they've had all season. They fought back and they made it close and had chances to win both of those at the end. In these games, right? The Jazz, the Suns, or excuse me, the Suns, the Jazz, the Kings, the Blazers just kicked their teeth in. I guess the Blazers' first half was close as well, but there were a lot more moments where the second half of the Clippers game and Blazers game, how about that? The Pacers just got their teeth kicked in. They looked completely awful in those moments in a way that they haven't looked awful all season. They've got to recover from that. And they've been good about bouncing back, right? They did it against Golden State. They got a key win against the Lakers on the trip. Now they're coming home. They got 3 in a row. They've got Washington without Beal, who's really struggling. They've got the Nets, who they've beaten twice already. And they play the Heat, which could be an emotional game if Oladipo ends up playing. He did debut earlier today. I mean, winning 1 or 2 of those keeps them at 500, like leading up to Christmas. I think that's pretty important for this team. But I think they need to answer from this trip because going 2-5, being back to where they are now, I think their vulnerabilities are showing up and they've got to figure them out. But from a statistical perspective, this road trip is concerning to me, and I, for a number of ways that have been talked about already between defensive stuff and shooting stuff and inconsistencies. I did not know this until today. So I was diving into the Pacers' numbers on this trip, and I wanted to see, like, Derek Kramer and I talked yesterday. Their offense was miserable on this trip, right? They're not shooting well, and they are last in the NBA, dead last in field goal percentage in the last 7 games, right? They're 30th out of 30 teams. The 0-7 Spurs are ahead of them in shooting percentage, right? Only 4 teams below 44%. The Pacers are 43, excuse me. And yet in 3-point percentage, the Pacers are 18th, right? 34% in their last 7 games. That's not great, but it's not bad. Like, that's acceptable. That is an acceptable 3-point percentage. So that means that the Pacers' 2-point percentage was the reason they were near the bottom of field goal percentage. So that's what I dug into that stunned me. Ready? The Pacers on the road trip that they just had in 7 games on 2-point shots, 2-pointers inside the arc, went 188 for 377. That means the Pacers went an entire road trip and made less than half of their 2s, not of their 3s, not the hard ones, of their 2-point shots. That is a sign of an offense that needs a kick in the pants. They need to figure something out on that end of the floor because that is unacceptably low 2-point percentage. Like you just look at the NBA in general of all teams and sort by 2-point percentage. No team is shooting below 50% on twos. Most teams are shooting above 52% on twos. And 15th in the league is about at 54% on twos. The Pacers were below 50% on this road trip. And even now, as I'm talking, they're at 52.4% leading into the Minnesota game they just played. That's 24th in the league. They're below 50% for a 7-game stretch of time. They could not make 2-point shots. That is something they have to fix. And I think some of that is the team that they have. Right? They're not particularly good at getting no one on their team is particularly good at getting all the way to the rim. A lot of their at the rim finishes are, surprising cuts or really good roll situations from Jalen Smith, Myles Turner, and Isaiah Jackson. But even Isaiah Jackson, he dunks a lot, but I calculated this during the game. His non-dunk shots from 0 to 3 feet below 50%, right? They do not have a lot of good finishers at the basket. And I use Karis LeVert as my example for this all the time. But he's the perfect example for it. Right, his effectiveness would wax and wane based on how close to the basket he would get in a given game, and the coaching staff would work with him, per his own admission, on getting all the way to the rim on his drives instead of going for the floater or pulling out too early. And for the Pacers, sometimes they pull out of these drives too quick, or they take a shot they shouldn't. And yes, getting into the paint alone still has value. I don't want to diminish drives at all, but I think that they're not good enough at getting all the way to the rim or getting enough pressure on that part, because they do finish well when they get there, but some of that is that they are picky and take some of the easier shots on those drives. So their 2-point percentage was extremely low on this trip in a way that really surprised me. And if you dig in deeper to the numbers of their 2-point percentage, they don't have a good shot variety inside the arc. And I think this can be a good thing, right? I don't want to this is going to divulge into an analytics thing, and I don't want to do that. But if you sort every NBA team on their field goal percentage from 0 to 3 feet, right at the rim, right? Pacers at 69%, that's 18th. That's fine. From 3 to 10 feet, so like in the paint but not at the rim, Pacers are 27th at 40.3%. From 10 to 16 feet, you can call that mid-range. 36.7%, that's third to last. And long twos, 16 feet to the three-point line, 35.8%. Now, those shots, in general, I guess the 3 to 10 foot ones are fine, but not ones that NBA teams take, and not one the Pacers should be taking more of. To be totally clear, I do not think the Pacers should be taking more of those shots, especially because their percentage on them stinks. But what I'm saying by pointing out those numbers is they don't have guys beyond their getting all the way to the rim attacks. They don't have guys who have they've had in past seasons between Warren and Depot and LeVert. They've had guys who are capable, even Tyreek Evans, of a mid-range jumper, right? Of kind of morphing the defense. If the defense is going stonewalling you at the basket, and they're a good defensive rotation team that makes threes a little harder, you got to make 1 or 2 mid-range shots just in the course of a game to vary it up. And that's why against Minnesota in this game, right, they shot so well from 3 against Minnesota, right? 19 for 42. And inside the arc, they go 20 for 39, barely above 50%, because Gobert's so good. They're like 1 or 2 mid-rangers, makes him step out a step farther, makes the defense think about it when you're attacking the rim. Like, they don't have that on their team. Now, I don't think mid-rangers, they should take more, right? Or maybe one more, right? But the fact that they don't have the threat is doing a lot is causing, a lot of issues for this team, because they did a lot of other stuff just fine on this trip, like a lot of their identity stuff. Fast break points over the last 7 games. Guess where the Pacers ranked in the NBA? First, right? They still were good at running and being this brilliant team in transition and being a fast team. And their points in the paint number isn't embarrassing, despite the fact, right around 18th, right, barely behind average, right? 0.7 points in the paint behind league average over the stretch. Like, they did fine at the stuff that they're normally pretty good at, but they couldn't make their twos, and they couldn't defend well enough to overcome that. So that was a big concerning stat that I learned today while researching how I wanted to talk about this thing. The other thing that they really struggled with was stopping the other team from doing the easy stuff. They gave up 56 opponent points in the game per game on this trip. That's 26th in the league over the last 7 games. And they gave up 15.6 points per game on fast breaks. That's 6th to last in the league over this trip. So some of the other stuff that other teams do, that's easy. The Pacers also struggle with that. 16.1 second chance points allowed, like all the hustle stat, miscellaneous point stuff. The Pacers struggle with that. So they shot okay. Like, they're I guess not okay. They shot it meh on this trip. Like, they had a couple of good games inflating their numbers, But in general, they struggled with two-pointers, and they couldn't defend teams from doing a lot of the hustle play stuff in a way that if they get some time to rest and regroup and adjust a tiny bit and really iron out their defensive principles, I think they can get through that stuff. But making two-pointers and having making the right shots, getting all the way to the rim and mixing it up at the right times, I think that will go a long way in improving the Pacers offense because they are a very good three-point shooting team. They've got the creators for it. They've just got to add a little bit more elements that this road trip exposed. They can hopefully figure it out in these coming games, right? Finally, they're back home. Finally, you can watch the Pacers in Gainbridge Fieldhouse. And I'm excited to actually leave my apartment for basketball reasons and not just sit here. 4 in a row for the Pacers after this. All tough opponents, though. Heat, Warriors, Nets, and Wizards. We'll cover all that here on Locked On Pacers. Talking Wizards tomorrow and one other segment on a TBD topic. But that'll be really fun. I always like talking about these other teams. Pacers have already played the Wizards twice, but we can finally get an update from that team and their team building strategy. You won't want to miss that. And then, of course, we'll be back next week talking all things Pacers. Thank you guys so much for listening. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you tomorrow.